All right, everybody, this is probably my favorite lesson from this whole course, just because it combines both liquid simulations and a fire simulation on top. So it's inspired by the scene from Resident Evil where they pour gasoline from the roof and they set it on fire. So I have this model here that I got from Evermotion. So I can't include it in the course, but feel free to look for any kind of a model online that you would like to use for something like this. And first we need to create some kind of an emitter for the liquid. So I'm just gonna create a box right here and we're gonna emit the liquid out of that. And we're gonna do the same polygon ID process that we've done many times. So make it a poly, select this polygon, and let's make it ID 10. And I'm gonna give it a mask so that there's some randomization to the emission. So let's go under the material editor and let me click on diffuse and let's create noise, apply it to the box so we can see what it looks like, show map in viewport. And I'm gonna give it maybe a low, just increase the low and then you can lower the high and it'll give you more contrast. And now let's create a source, but we need to create a liquid source instead of a fire source. So this one, the blue one. And for the liquid source, I'm gonna add this box as my source. And before I forget, let's set the polygon ID to 10. And let's copy this mask. So copy and paste it into the mask slot over here and say paste this instance. So for the outgoing velocity, I'm gonna do 100 centimeters, maybe a noise of 0.1, create a liquid simulation grid. So again, that would be the blue one. And I'm just gonna drag one over the whole area here, all the way up. Grid. So a lot of these settings are very similar to the fire. You just get some other settings for the liquid. So I'm just gonna maybe shrink it on the Y. So just like with the fire, we need to say jammed minus on Z so that the floor of it will be the floor, even though I have this model here which will catch all of the liquid actually, so it doesn't really matter. And we do need to increase the resolution. So I'm gonna give it maybe 4 centimeters for the cell size for now. Let's do 2 steps per frame. I would say steps per frame are even more important for liquid simulations than they are for smoke. Because especially if you have a pouring liquid, you do need usually at least 2 steps per frame, preferably higher. But since everything's gonna get hidden by the smoke, I'm not gonna sweat it right now. So let's just do 2. Now for the viscosity, I did 0.2. You could just leave it as 0, which is water. But by making the viscosity higher, we're getting more of that oily look of the liquid a little bit. And basically everything else can stay at default. So just like with fire, I'm gonna go under output and output velocity for motion blur for the liquid and select the path. And also what you can do is go under preview and say show mesh, and you can hide the particles. So you'll see what it'll do in a second. So with all of these settings in place, let's run the liquid simulation. All right, so I'm running the sim and everything is working as it should. I think maybe the liquid is a bit too thick. So if I were to run this again, I would maybe just decrease the viscosity to 0.1 instead of 0.2. And also I'm noticing that some of the liquid is getting killed on the x-axis over here. So we can go back under grid and say just jam both on all axes. Let's create a fire sim now. And I'm gonna make that a larger grid because I know that the fire is gonna be pretty big and it's gonna cover a chunk of the scene. I'm just gonna maybe shrink this a little bit so it's not too huge. So for my final resolution, I did about 3 centimeters, which right now is about 23 million cells. So that's the resolution that gave me this kind of a detail, which I think it's really nice. It really pays off to have the patience and simulate these things at as much of a high resolution as you have the patience for. But for the sake of testing this right now, I'm just gonna make this 4. Actually, maybe let's make it 5 centimeters so it's pretty fast. And before we go any further with this, let's create a fire source. And this time I'm gonna say add, and I'm gonna actually pick the liquid simulation grid. And as you can see, it's not working, and that's because you need to actually check can pick simulators. And now you can click add, and you can add the liquid, and it'll ask you which one. So we want to add the Phoenix FD Liquid 001 and say okay. Fire outgoing velocity, I'm gonna do 10 centimeters with again maybe 0.2 for noise. We can disable temperature, disable smoke, enable fuel, and I'm gonna give it a motion velocity of 3 because I really want that fire to be given speed by the falling liquid and be pushed down the way it is here. I think that's a really cool effect, the way the fire is going down and then it goes up when it hits the ground. So motion velocity really helps with that. So going back to the fire settings, under dynamics, 0.5 for cooling, -3 for fuel buoyancy, because again, I want that fuel to be falling down. We can do 0.5 for smoke dissipation. So a lot of these settings are the same as the flamethrower. I think what I actually did was I started with the flamethrower setup and I just added the liquid. So it's very similar in this regard to the previous lesson, but the only thing that's new really is that we're combining it with the liquid simulation. So no surprises here. I'm just gonna give it a bit more of that vorticity, and we can do PCG symmetric here with a quality of maybe 40, and let's give it 2 steps per frame. And as always, enable GPU preview, and under output we need to do fuel and velocity, and then under fuel I'm gonna say enable burning, ignition temperature 290, energy 5, fuel depletion I did 4, smoke amount 1, smoke threshold 1, and propagation we can do 0. And one more thing we can do is give like that black oil material to the liquid simulation. So I've already prepared it. It's basically just almost pure black for the diffuse, some reflection, and 0.87 for the glossiness, and you can apply that straight to that liquid. And with all of these settings in place, I'm gonna run the fire sim and see if we get what we want. So it's just gonna give you a warning that the liquid might not work properly with the fire source, but it's gonna work just fine. So you can just say, do not show this message, and okay, and let it run. All right, so I'm running the sim and it's kind of hard to tell whether it's working or not. I mean, I kind of like the smoke, but I feel like we need to pause the sim and play with the shader to make sure that the fire is actually gonna look good. First, let's just drag the curve and see if we can get some of that fire to show up in there. And then maybe let's set the fire multiplier to 5. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of fire to show up. So I'm gonna drag this up even higher, and maybe let's lower the physical base a little bit. So maybe let's do something like 0.7 to really bring that fire in there. And I'm gonna just drag this slider again until I get just the right amount of fire that I want. So this is starting to look pretty good. It's kind of hard to tell because of the white smoke. So let's go under smoke color and make that black color. Okay, that really brings out the fire. And then maybe do smoke opacity, and I would do the opacity of maybe like 0.8. That looks better, but let's also try the base tone temperature. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I think at this point we're getting very close to what my initial render looked like. If you compare, we're getting that fire look in there. So now I would just go back under the fire here, and as always, you can just play with the shader. All right, so I'm happy with the shader the way it is right now. I'm just gonna hit continue simulation. And if it's getting kind of slow, you can always go under preview and just increase the detail reduction maybe to just 1 to kill some of the detail, but now it's faster. And I'm gonna unhide my V-Ray lights and my V-Ray planes to show you the lighting that I did. So I just have 2 simple lights in here. This one has a multiplier of 2. This one has a multiplier of 4, and that just helps illuminate the smoke from all sides and also the building. So really very simple. Let me just pause the sim and run a test render to show you what this looks like right now. All right, this is what it looks like rendered. I like it. I think I would just increase the amount of light that the fire casts on the scene. So I'm gonna go back under the volumetric settings here and say light power on scene. Maybe we can make that 3, and everything else looks good. So at this point I would just go back under grid and increase the resolution of the fire and smoke. So like I said, I did 3 centimeter cell size. which should give you around 20 million total cells. So it's gonna take a while to sim, but then when you render it out, you're gonna get some pretty beautiful detail. So again, this was my final result after doing this technique. There's a lot of noise in the render, and that's just because I didn't really raise the V-Ray subdivs high enough. So if you wanted to eliminate the noise inside of the building and stuff like that, you could maybe do up to 8 maximum subdivs, and you could increase the light cache to maybe 2500, and that should get rid of a lot of that noise. Really, I was all about just showing you the fire effect. So as always, hope that you guys enjoyed this one, definitely one of my favorites, and I'll see you in the next one.